Jay's Analysis. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood here with the wonderful Jamie Hanshaw. Jaime Hanshaw. She's in studio at the fabulous Jay's Analysis Studios here in the middle of nowhere. Hi.
Hi, Jay. How are you?
I'm doing great. We're going to talk about this internet buzz that surrounds the Netflix series Stranger Things. What did you think of Stranger? Did you like it?
I did like it. I'm impressed with all the new Netflix shows, actually. The original series that come out have a lot to say, like House of Cards is one I can think of about politics that kind of shows you what's really going on behind the scenes in politics. And then you got Orange is the New Black, about the prison system and all the different...
The private prison industrial complex.
Prison industrial complex, exactly. It's told through the eyes of one inmate, and I think that show does a good job. I think that lady can really write a series, if I do say so. But then you got Stranger Things is the one we're talking about today.
Yes, this is an 80s pastiche. I wanted to use that term just to sound like I'm snobby and elitist.
What is
pastiche.
What does that mean?
You don't know what that word means? Well, I guess we're going to have to pause this and use our Googles and thesauricize. That means a genre homage, like you're paying homage to a genre.
Oh, okay.
This is paying homage to pretty much anything out of the 80s.
Right.
So, Steven Spielberg movies, Evil Dead, Sam Raimi, Poltergeist, right.
Well, that's one of the things that first struck me about it was that immediately as you're watching it, you're thinking about the Goonies.
Mm-hmm.
You're thinking about E.T. It really looks like E.T. a lot. It has themes from the Aliens and pretty much all the big blockbuster 80s
right
movies. And they even have the posters on the walls, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of 80s movies.
John Carpenter movies, yeah. So I've got a fuller breakdown at Jay's Analysis. If you want to go there, you can check it out. But we're going to talk about some of that. And you sent me an interesting article from the Hollywood Reporter that this is apparently a trend in Hollywood with A-list actors and so forth are playing D&D. Now, when I played D&D when I was in 8th grade, I learned very quickly that this is like kryptonite to the feminine gender. But now The Rock plays D&D.
Yeah, and Vin Diesel. And well, I wasn't allowed to play with that because we had evangelical house.
Right.
So that was one of those things that was definitely on the no-no list of portals and gateways to the occult.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of ridiculous. But did you know that The Rock's D&D character is actually a small rock? His character is just a stone.
The pebble?
A small pebble.
Mm-hmm.
And do you remember Willow?
Willow.
Do you remember Willow?
Yeah.
You remember when Willow throws those little acorns or stones or whatever and he can turn things to stone?
Yeah.
That's predictive programming for The Rock. No, I'm joking. The A-listers that apparently are into D&D include Mike Myers, Vin Diesel, The Rock, Drew Barrymore, Stephen Colbert. Now, there's a reason for this, and that's because the system is, of course, pushing nerd culture. The establishment wants to promote that for various reasons, but also because role-playing is practice for acting.
Right.
And
acting and role-playing.
Yeah, so LARPing, which was ludicrous 10 years ago, I guess is now becoming cool.
What's that? When they go in the park and play?
The foam swords.
Fighting.
Yeah. And the foam girlfriends. Well, I guess there's big fat girls that are into it, but you can find that at a Renaissance fair for those who would like more information. If you want for crafting your D&D wildebeest, go to a Renaissance fair and you'll find very large creatures that are supposedly female. Isn't that true? You've been to Renaissance fairs. I never
Sad
have.
but true. Yeah. I can't say that.
So, what we got in this show is basic basically the Goonies team experiencing supernatural interdimensional phenomenon, and this leads to a missing kid. Will Byers shows up missing. His crew is, of course, interested in finding him. They don't find him. They find an escaped little never-ending story princess girl who is a skinhead.
Right.
Not really. She's not a skinhead, but she's bald and strange looking, and she has a tattoo that says 11.
And she doesn't speak a lot.
Right. She can't really talk. And why is this?
Because she was a MKULTRA victim. Right.
Yes, she was taken and used in LSD experiments by this creepy character played by Matthew Modine, Dr. Brenner, who is her papa. So there's a kind of hint at maybe incest. Well, she's not his daughter, but it's a kind of pedo type thing.
Yeah, I wonder if that will come out in a next season, because all of the classic torture techniques that they would use, they showed her sensory deprivation underwater. They showed her having to kill a cat, which I've read in several, satanic ritual abuse survivor testimonies. That's kind of a common theme. What else? She had to kill a person. Or no, she did.
It's instead of men who stare at goats, it's kids who stare at kitties.
Yeah.
And she's supposed to kill it with her mind, and she can remote view, and she's supposed to spy on the Soviets and all this stuff that supposedly is the real basis for the SRI programs. Now, I mentioned the D&D aspect because it's about, as I've cited in my book, the Dudley Young comparative religion scholar, Origins of the Sacred Ecstasies of Love and War. He says the earliest gods were invoked by ritual act, drawn on, that is the thing done, such as a sacrificial dance, commemorating the fact that our life begins and ends when the gods call upon us. Subsequently, the thing that was said, legomenon, was done, and the dromenon was on its way to becoming the drama. Once speech within the temple precincts had been endowed with the power of word magic, we have the invocation properly so called. So theater and acting has always been tied into the gods. I've talked about this in my book, you've talked about it in your book. And that is why D&D matters, and why we see at the beginning also from E.T., the kids are of course playing D&D, and this accidentally maybe invokes kind of the Goetia, right?
Well,
I mean, that's what we got in this.
It wasn't the D&D, it was the mind control experiments invoking the...
No, but the D&D game is tied into what's happening in reality.
Oh,
because they have a Demogorgon.
Right.
And all I'm saying is that you see that in the same scene as you see here in E.T., where Elliot and buddies, his gang, are playing D&D. And of course we see the image of Jupiter here, and in other shots you can see Saturn on the actual game box of whatever version of D&D they're playing. And this gives us the impression that it's foreshadowing for what later occurs in the film, where we have space beings, E.T., right? So in Stranger Things, you've got hints and nods to this, but also references to this, what I think is fake, Montauk program. The show is originally reportedly going to be called Montauk, which is connected via Jacques Vallée to the mind control and psychological warfare operations related to the Philadelphia experiment. Now, Vallee's opinion is that Montauk is itself a psyop, that it was basically an exercise in seeing what you could get people to believe. Now,
have you heard of the Montauk Monster?
You mean one of the cryptozoological things?
Well, a lot of people talk about this, and it's kind of like an urban legend. If you go around there, they'll ask you if you've heard of this, the Montauk Monster, and that's kind of what Stranger Things is.
Okay, that makes sense. Right. So we got a little bit of the fiction aspect here mixed into real world 70s,
urban
80s
legends and
urban legends and cryptozoology,
yeah,
right? Fortean stuff, Charles Fort. And so now I've interviewed Pharrell on his opinions on Philadelphia experiment and time bending and all that, which is an interesting interview. You can go check that out in my article. But the reason that we bring that up is that Vallée says that the experiments, quote, itself is a hoax, suggesting that it's really an exercise in seeing perhaps what you could get people to believe. And then you always have the whistleblower expert, former Navy military person who comes out and leaks the information, which is like 99% of the time bullshit. So we don't need to go down that road. But what's interesting is that Jacques Vallée was into the occult, reportedly hung out with members of the OTO, and was into Rosicrucianism. Now, he's famous for being also working with I believe, the Department of Defense on the UFO phenomenon. So what exactly Jacques Vallée's role is in this is, I guess, up for some debate. Was he a disinformation agent? Who knows? But if you watch Close Encounters, which this series pays several nods to, you'll remember the Lacombe character, the symbologist, the French philosopher, cartographer type guy. He's supposed to be Jacques Vallée.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And he's the famous French actor Francois Truffaut is playing the character of Jacques Vallée, and you see his role in the so-called UFO phenomenon. Now, all of that is kind of hinted at in the background of Stranger Things. But let's talk about other influences. I noticed, let's see, we sat down and we listed these. We saw Star Wars, Alien,
Stephen
King, Goonies, H.P. Lovecraft, X-Men, John Carpenter, probably more. But what is this idea of a Demogorgon? Let's talk about that. Now, I looked this up, did some research on this. Of course, I used to play D&D, as I said, before I figured out that I could get girlfriends. And I defeated my own personal Demogorgon and rescued the princesses. That was funny. The Demogorgon inhabits a realm of the upside down. This is the negative, demonic side of our world, the reverse, the inverse. And this roughly matches up to the Kabbalistic notion of the Qliphoth, or the Abyss, or Dayot. It's different ways. Mm-hmm. And for example, Crowley says about this that it's difficult to explain. It corresponds more or less to the gap in thought and the real, which is ideal, and the unreal, which is actual. In the abyss, all things exist, potentiality. This is also in Kabbalism, as we said. It's the storehouse of phenomena and all impressions. And this is how you can get from this realm, which is where we kind of get inspirations or creative ideas. The idea that, actually all of the demons, Cthulhu, and so forth, maybe they inhabit this realm, the realm of the abyss.
Mm-hmm. And that's why her name is 11, because Doth is the hidden 11 Sephirah on the Tree of Life.
Interesting. Yeah. Also 9/11.
Right.
So.
And 11 is the number of ceremonial magic.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I was going to bring that up as well. Uh-huh. So, interesting too that they change her name to El.
Right. Which has another meaning. Which
is the ancient Near Eastern Canaanite and roughly Semitic term just used for a god.
Right. Means Lord.
Yeah. So she is a demigod of sorts. She's a kind of avatar, kind of in between. This is where we get the sort of X-Men aspect of the film.
With superpowers.
Yeah, X-Men, right?
Yeah.
And they mention X-Men several times in the film. Now, since we find out that it's actually people who have been sucked into the other side of the spiritual realm, into the dark side, mm-hmm. they can communicate with our side through light mm-hmm. and electricity, which of course brings to mind things like Twin Peaks and David Lynch's techniques of flickering lights.
So I thought this was interesting. Kenneth Grant would call this Universe B, which is right on top of our universe, but it's like a shadow world, so mm-hmm, they're trapped in this shadow world of the demonic that is interacting with our world through electricity.
Exactly. So kind of hints at CERN type stuff, and we even have the reference in the show to the fact that the portal that's been opened at the Hawkins facility, Hawkins lab, is part of the Reagan SDI Defense Initiative, Star Wars Defense Initiative. So once again, Star Wars, which is part of the Cold War dialectic. It is not Stephen Hawking. It is not Stephen Hawking's lab. It's rather a kind of mix, I guess, between DARPA and CERN meets the Stanford Research Institute meets MKULTRA. It's kind of all that together.
Yeah.
And we have several mentions to the Cold War. Right? So it's Reagan's the president. Everybody's constantly talking about the Russians and the Ruskies and
commie weapons.
And L is used to remote view on Soviet and KGB leaders.
Oh, right.
If you remember, that was her purpose initially. And while she's in the ether, the spiritual realm, she encounters the Demogorgon.
Right.
And that's how we have this series of strange events and powers. Now, the notion of contacting spiritual world through symbolic means is, of course, straight out of Kabbalah, as we said. And it's also kind of roughly related to semiotics, the philosophy of signs and symbols, and sigils. That's the notion behind ritual magic and all that.
Well, she kind of made a Ouija board on her wall.
She does, exactly. That's exactly what she does, I was going to say. And so kind of divination, basic principles of divination. William Ramsey, who's written on this, argues in a video linked in my article that this might have reference to the West Memphis cases. There's some name similarities between the children and the possibility of ritual murder and so forth. Now, you might be saying, well, there's nothing ritual murder about this. Actually, that's not true. They say in the show that blood is what brings the Demogorgon.
This is true since the beginning of time in all black magic rituals.
And essentially all cultures that practiced human sacrifice, right?
Yeah. When the blood is offered, the spirits will come, that's for sure.
Right. And so, we think about state corruption. Why is it that throughout history, state corruption always ends up in human sacrifice? I mean, that's what war is.
Exactly. Anyway. It's a mass human sacrifice ritual with all the regalia and signifiers of the people who are being sacrificed on their uniforms.
Now, why would, if it's not demonic, why would you have the same patterns in all the cultures historically?
Mm-hmm.
So, what's really neat about this series is that it mentions MKUltra explicitly. I was not expecting that.
Right, and this isn't the only one to mention MKUltra by name. There have been other shows. I can't think of names of them offhand right now, but it's not the first television series to mention MKUltra by name.
Well, the Jesse Eisenberg movie American Ultra was the entire film about MKUltra.
Mm-hmm.
And I did an analysis of that was pretty in-depth.
We did a show about that.
Yeah, exactly. And I did an analysis of it that was in-depth. And here you'll see the same pattern back to this show. But what's neat is that I have talked in the last couple years pretty regularly about the fact that MKUltra was not just a mind control thing. It was about mass culture, but it was also part of larger plans, not just for military-industrial complex and the weaponization of various aspects of culture, but basically engineering the entire biosphere. And so chemtrails, geoengineering, that all fits into the exact same plans. And the series says that everything that's going on is under the Department of Energy. That's interesting because that's exactly what I've been talking about with geoengineering, MKUltra, inoculations, all the way back to Jonas Salk, Manhattan Project. All of this and MKUltra are under the aegis of Department of Energy. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, and it's the electrical energy that connects the two dimensions.
Yes, light and energy play an important role throughout the series, and in fact, we're going to see why that is here towards the end. And we figured out that L is actually this evolved next stage of humanity. She's somewhat androgynous, but she's still, in my view, a dominantly feminine archetype. And you'll notice that she, I think, is basically an incarnation of the goddess, or the Pistis Sophia. She represents the Luciferian light or enlightenment in its androgynous female, quasi-feminine form, and it's therefore Gnostic. We've seen the same pattern in films like Hannah, Hunger Games, Lucy, Ex Machina, Jupiter Ascending, where the female form becomes incarnate as a kind of new balance to the patriarchal tyranny. And this is going to, I guess, balance the force or bring in the new dawn or whatever your occultic milieu.
Your new Star Wars has a heroine.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Now, I thought it was neat that Edmund Spencer in his occultic fairy queen mentions the Demogorgon. And so in a lot of myths or religious philosophy, the Demogorgon is the demiurge or the creator. Now, so this is why my interpretation of the film is that when the demon at the end is basically cruciform on the chalkboard, when Elle destroys it or dissolves it, she does so as an emblem of the ending of the so-called patriarchal religions and the reign of the new Aeon. What did you think of that?
That all makes sense to me. That's something that was uniquely you. I didn't really see that.
I mean, the series uses 11 and 77 several times, which William Ramsey pointed out. Those are Crowleyan ideas, and it's Crowleyanism that claims basically to be Gnostic and Luciferian, and that you're going to have creation of the new man is not something that communism or fascism bring, but as his Book of the Law discusses, that rather it will be the crown and conquering child. And what do you have here but a crown and conquering child?
And Baphomet is androgynous.
Is androgynous, exactly. Yeah. So you've been listening to our breakdown of Stranger Things. What do you, any other ideas on this that you want to bring forth?
Yeah, I thought it was really good. One last thing, there's a reference even to Alice in Wonderland, because in the one story line where the teenagers are out in the woods, she finds the portal to the underworld in
That's right,
a tree, just like Alice. And,
good point.
She's going into the underworld now, right?
Oh, and the facility, the Hawking lab, it's in the underground base where the portal is.
Right.
So here, once again, we have the reference to the underworld, Hades, underground bases, and so forth. All right. Well, that sums up our brief analysis of. You can read more at jaysanalysis.com, Stranger Things, and you can check out my lectures, which you can subscribe to for $4.95 a month or $60 a year, and Jamie Hanshaw's book, Hollywood Mind Control, as well as my book, Esoteric Hollywood. Thank you for listening.